Sir Nico. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to connect again with our participants. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm back. I would like to welcome you again to this session. And this time, my topic is about classroom assessment. Okay, so let me start my session. Allow me to share my PowerPoint presentation with you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my session entitled Classroom Assessment. I am again your lecturer, Dr. Ann Welms from the Mindanao State University in Tawi-Tawi, Philippines. For our session, at the end of this session, you're expected to explain what is assessment and its purpose, discuss the principles, methods, and techniques of assessment in the context of flexible learning, and apply the appropriate process in assessing, grading, and reporting the performance of students in the classroom. Are you okay with that? Okay, so we will be discussing for this session everything about classroom assessment, from the definition of assessment, the purpose, what are the methods of assessment, some principles, the techniques, the process of doing classroom assessment, and the grading and reporting of the performance of the students inside the classroom. All right, so are you ready for this session? We will now start with classroom assessment. So let's try to understand what is classroom assessment. Classroom assessment includes the full range of information teachers gather in their classrooms. This information helps them understand their pupils, monitor instruction, and establish a viable classroom culture. It also includes a variety of ways teachers gather, synthesize, and interpret information. That's according to Russian. Are you ready with our session? So let's start with trying to understand what is classroom assessment. Classroom assessment includes the full range of information teachers gather in their classrooms. This information helps them understand their pupils, monitor instruction, and establish a viable classroom culture. So according to Russian in 2001, it also includes a variety of ways teachers gather, synthesize, and interpret information. This is inside the classroom. So it's the overall information that teachers gather inside the classroom. So let's try to understand the difference between and among assessment, test, and measurement. In understanding assessment, if you look at assessment, it is a general term that includes all the ways that teachers gather information in their classroom. Common assessment approaches include tests, observations, interviews, oral questions, portfolio, and projects, among others. So there are so many things considered as assessment. While a test, this is a formal, systematic, usually paper and pencil procedure used to gather information about pupils' behavior. Test results are used to make generalizations about how pupils would have performed on similar but untested behaviors. Tests are only one of the many types of assessment. Get that? So, if you look at the figure, test is only one form of assessment. This is a formal form of assessment. When you look at measurement, measurement is the process of quantifying or assigning a number to pupil performance. So inside the classroom, after a test, you're going to assign a number or a figure to the performance of the pupil. The most common example of measurement in the classroom occurs when a teacher scores a quiz or test. Scoring produces a numerical description of performance. In measurement, A numerical score is used to represent the individual's performance. All right, so when you look at assessment, assessment is a broad term, and then part of the assessment is a test. And when you give a numerical score to the pupil's performance, that's the time you consider that as measurement. Okay, so what about evaluation? You know, evaluation involves judging the quality of a pupil's performance or determining a possible course of action. If you look at the illustration, while measurement is quantitative, meaning to say we're going to assign numbers or numerical values to the performance of the students, evaluation may be quantitative or qualitative. Evaluation describes the merit, worth, goodness, or desirability of pupils' performance. Okay, so if you look at that, evaluation involves judging the quality of a pupil's performance. All right, so look at the figure. Assessment is a broad term, and then test is just part of the assessment, and then we put the numerical value to the performance of the students. That's we call measurement, and then overall it's called evaluation. Okay, so let's look at the purposes of classroom assessment. Why do we need to assess the performance of our pupils, our students? We look at this in four lenses. In the lens of the teacher, in the lens of the administrator, the curriculum planners, and the parents. If you are a teacher, which is our concern, if you are a teacher, your purpose of assessing your pupils is to know the progress of our students. So we utilize tests to adjust our teaching and learning. That's our purpose. So based from the results of the performance of the students inside the classroom, we make adjustments in our teaching and learning. That's on the part of the teacher. On the part of the administrator, the purpose of classroom assessment is to have accurate information of achievements of the pupils. As administrator, like Sir Nico is an administrator. So he needs to know, he needs to have information as to what our pupils have achieved, okay? For the curriculum planners, those persons who are drafting the curriculum for whatever educational program we have, the purpose of assessing them, our students in the classroom, is to use the data to plan for changes in the curriculum. And for the parents, there's a purpose of assessing our pupils in the classroom, the results of the tests of the students. That is to find out how well their children are doing in school. So overall, we have four purposes of classroom assessment. In the point of view of the teacher, point of view of the administrator, of the curriculum planners, and of the parents. Why do we assess? Why? So why do we assess? We also lead into purposes in assessing learning. According to Balagtas, in 2020, this is the latest, assessment may be for learning, that's formative and diagnostic. Inside the classroom, during teaching, in the formative time of the students, you assess for learning. You also assess as learning. It's either formative, diagnostic, or summative. And then assessment of learning, that's at the end. At the end of the lesson, you're going to assess whether our students were able to learn something out of what we have taught them. Okay, so let's look at the parameters of assessment. As I have mentioned, when you give a test to your students, you should know the different parameters. First is the target. Make sure that when you give a test, you know what are the elements of learning to be assessed. For example, you should know what skills you would like to assess, whether it's listening, speaking, reading, or writing. So that the test that you will prepare will also be targeting those skills. You do not just give a test and then you would like to assess the reading skills and then you're preparing a test for speaking or for writing. So you should know your target. Second parameter is your purpose. When you give a test, you should know why you're giving a test. You just don't give a test because you're not ready with your lesson. You give a test because you would like to know whether your students learned something out of what you have taught them, or what you would like to know whether they know something about they have a knowledge about your the topic at hand. So you call it diagnostic. So you should have purpose. And then the approach. When you give a test, you should know what specific method or modalities you're going to employ in your test, whether you will be giving a traditional paper and pencil test or a portfolio or the overall performance of your students. You should be able to know that. Another parameter is the technique. These techniques are specific practical ways to be used in giving a test, in trying to assess the performance of your students. We will talk about this one by one later. And the tools. These are specific instruments to be adopted, developed, and utilized in giving a test. And of course, the assessors, the person assessing the specific individuals who will be assessing you, the teachers. So these are the parameters. What this is telling us, as teachers inside the classroom, we just don't give a test without considering all of these parameters. We give a test because we have a purpose. And some teachers would give a test because they're not ready with the lesson. It's a no-no in teaching. Okay, let's talk about methods of assessment. What are the methods that we need to use inside the classroom? First is the paper and pencil method. This is very common. We all use this. Okay, so what is paper and pencil? This refers to the assessment in which students write their responses to questions or problems. Okay, so after paper and pencil method, we also have the observation method. What is observation method? This involves watching or listening to students to carry out some activity. We call it observation of a process, or judging a product a pupil has produced. Observation of product. So observation is actually when you give a task to your students, and then you would like to get a feedback of how they do the task, or how they were able to come up with a kind of product. So you're going to observe, and then from there you will have now an information about the performance of the students. This observation method. And the last one is the questioning method. Questioning method uses oral questions to assess students during a lesson. We usually ask questions to our students when we teach them. So it's either you ask question because you just would like to motivate them to think, or you ask questions to assess whether they already know something about the topic at hand, or ask questions whether because you would like to know whether they understood what you are telling them. Okay, so let's take this up one by one. The paper and pencil method. Example, selection type. Have you prepared this in your classroom? I know you have prepared this already. You have the multiple choice, the true-false type, the matching type, identifying errors. These are familiar to you. You also have the closed constructed type, the filling the blanks, the constructed response, the closed test, the closed test, which I have already explained in my previous session on developing the 4 macro skills. And then the open-ended type, which is essay and the formal theme. All of these are considered paper and pencil method. How do we assess using traditional tests? This is according to Balagtas. Just to reiterate that for the paper and pencil or the traditional test, we have the selection type of test, the multiple choice. The multiple choice needs 3 or more choices. In language teaching, we always encourage our teachers to prepare 4 choices when you do multiple choice type of test. You give them 4 choices. And 3 is okay, but to make it valid and reliable, I mean, the results would be valid and reliable, you have to give more choices. So 4, we encourage our teachers to really use 4 choices. For the matching type, we have 2 columns, each for items and responses. You match column A with column B, and then if there are 10 items, your choices would be 11. That's for language testing. So there's always a destructor for the matching type. So if your item is 15, your choices would be 16. For true or false, now you have 2 alternate choices. And then when you check, you use answer key. True or false, it would be better if you use modified true or false. If the statement is true, write true. If the statement is false, write false, and then make the statement true, so that you discourage guessing when you give true or false test. And then the supply type of test, a short answer. You supply the words to answer questions. Or completion type, you supply words to complete the statements or the selection. And then the essay, you supply answers to questions, or when you score it, you use rubrics, or you use a scoring plan, which will be discussed later on. Let's now proceed to the 6 rules in writing paper and pencil test items. Rule number 1, avoid wording and sentence structure that is ambiguous and confusing. Look at our example. All but one of the following is not an element. So confusing. Which one is not? Carbon, salt, sugar, plastic. See? If you're the one taking the test, you will be confused because of the sentence structure and the wording. Okay, another example. The revised version is, which one of these is an element? See, that's better. Carbon, salt, sugar, or plastic. So avoid sentence structure that is confusing. Another example. Corazon Aquino was our best president. True or false? The revised version, Corazon Aquino was the first woman president of the Philippines. True or false? See, the revised version is better, of course, because we cannot qualify and quantify best president, but first woman president is better. Okay, rule number 2, use appropriate vocabulary. Example, the postulation of capillary effectuation promotes elucidation of how pliant substances ascend in incommodious veins. True or false? Look at the vocabulary. They're big words in one sentence. So let's simplify. The thesis of capillary execution serves to illuminate how fluids are elevated in small tubes. They're the same. Another, the principle of capillary action helps explain how liquids rise in small passages. True or false? Look at our examples. What is this telling us? If you're preparing the test, make sure that your students understand your statement, or else they will just guess the answer. Okay? Rule number 3, keep questions short but to the point. For example, Billy's mother wanted to bake an apple pie for his aunt and uncle who were coming for a visit. Billy had not seen them for many months. When Billy's mother saw that she had no apples in the house, she sent Billy to the store to buy some. Her recipe called for 8 apples to make a pie. If apples at the store cost 30 pesos for 2, how much money will Billy need to buy 8 apples? A, 30 pesos, B, 90 pesos, C, 120 pesos, and D, 240 pesos. Let's look at the revised version. To make an apple pie, Billy's mother needed 8 apples. If apples cost 30 pesos for 2, how much will 8 apples cost? See, the revised version, of course, is Much, much better. You have to keep the question short, but to the point. The first version is too wordy. Okay, rule number 4, write items that have one correct answer. Examples. Ernest Hemingway wrote blank. So we are expecting so many answers because Ernest Hemingway is a prolific writer. Rather is, who is Jose Rizal? So there are so many answers. Let's look at the revised version. The name of the author of The Old Man and the Sea is, we only have one answer. So it's Ernest Hemingway. Who is our national hero? It's Jose Rizal. So there's only one answer. Okay, so you have to avoid the items that have more than one answer. Okay, let's proceed to rule number 5. Give information about the desired answer. Example, explain why third graders should study science. And let's look at the revised version. Give 2 reasons why a grade 3 pupil should study science. What are some things that studying science teaches us? Write your answer in at least 5 complete sentences. Look at this example. As teachers, when we prepare the items, we are already expect the answers. Whatever is the desired answer, you at least help your students. So when you prepare the items, you give information. Although the first example is short, but it's broad. While in the revised version, we're trying to help our students by giving follow-up questions. And we're trying to zero in on 2 reasons only so that our students would think for 2 reasons only. While in the first example, they need more time in trying to understand what really needs to be answered. Rule number 6, do not provide clues to the correct answer. For example, a figure that has 8 sides is called an pentagon, quadrilateral, octagon, ogive. The revised version is that figures that have 8 sides are called pentagon, quadrilateral, octagon, or ogive. What's the clue there? The clue is on the article an. Because if you have the article an in the stem, meaning to say you're giving a clue that the answer would start with a vowel sound or vowel letter. So it's called an. So it's either octagon or ogive. But you have to delete the an. Do not give a clue to the answer. Another example is, which of the following best describes an electron? Negative particle, neutral particle, positive particle, or a voting machine? See, the letter D choice is really off tangent. The revised version, which of the following best describes an electron? Negative particle, neutral particle, positive particle, common particle. Look at that. So they're all particles. While in our first example, a voting machine is really far from the other choices. So you're actually giving them a clue that it's not the correct answer. Okay, so much with the first method, the traditional method, the paper and pencil method. We now proceed to the observation method. As mentioned earlier, the observation method provides the opportunity to assess a process or situation and document evidence of what is seen and heard through observation. For example, pupils mispronounce words in oral reading and then consistently give clear and detailed responses, interact well in groups, speak out in class, fight with other pupils, demonstrate excellent concentration, have puzzled looks on their faces, patiently wait for their turn, fall asleep in classes, or fail to sit for more than 5 minutes. Teachers become aware of these behaviors through observation. Everything that is happening inside your classroom, you have to be keen observants of your students, your pupils. because this is another way of assessing performance of your students, consciously or unconsciously. You also have performance-based assessment. This includes real performances like role play, dance, journals, science experiment, drawing. You can assess them through observation. And of course, you need to use rubrics. The last method is the questioning method. This is used to review a previously taught topic, brainstorm a new topic, find out how well the lesson is being understood by the pupils, and get the attention of a student who is not paying attention. What do we use? Questions. The teacher can gather the information he or she wants in the course of instruction without the intrusiveness of administering a paper and pencil assessment. You can use questioning method. What's the purpose of questioning? To promote attention. We always use questions when we motivate our students. We would like to activate their prior knowledge about the topic. You would like to keep them awake when they're sleepy, just to get their attention. We call their names and then we ask questions, just to promote attention, to promote deeper processing, to prompt them when their minds are already not within your lesson. So you have to ask questions to probe deeper. All right. Another purpose of questioning is to promote learning from peers. Now, when you ask question, you also inquire from your seatmates, from your peers, from your companions about the topic if you failed to get the idea as presented to you. To provide reinforcement. Sometimes we give assignment to reinforce the lesson in the form of questions. To provide pace and control, like, am I too fast? And then you would like to, you always ask question because you would like to monitor learning inside your classroom. To provide diagnostic information, okay? Because you would like to know whether they're still with you, especially if you're discussing the topic, and sometimes they're only physically present and then they're mentally not with you. So you would like to provide additional information about the topic. And let's look at the types of questions. There are only two types: the lower level, which requires recall or memorization, and the higher level, which requires pupils to perform processes more complicated than pure memorization. In my previous session about developing the four macro skills, I already presented Bloom's taxonomy of comprehension, and I also shared with you the question prompts of the different levels of comprehension. So sample, I would like to give you a sample for each level of Bloom's taxonomy, which I have already presented in my previous session. Perhaps you can review my lecture about that topic. My example for this particular session on classroom assessment is on solar system. The topic is on solar system. So for the knowledge question example, what are the names of the 9 planets in the solar system? This is low-level question. And then comprehension, explain in your own words the important characteristics of the moon. This is on comprehension. Second level. Third level is application. How could you determine the distance between the Earth and Mars? So the application. And then, okay, so let's proceed to the higher level questions. The analysis question for the topic solar system. What are the 3 differences between the sun and the moon? So you're going to analyze. You have to chop down into smaller pieces the topic on solar system. And then for the synthesis question, what is one characteristic that all planets in the solar system have? So if you look at this, you're going to synthesize from specific to general. So you give one characteristic. So you have to study each characteristic and then summarize it into one. And then evaluation question, which planet is most like the Earth? Explain why. These three are examples of higher level questions in the topic solar system. So in questioning, you don't just limit your questioning to lower level questions. You ask them, but don't limit to only the first level and the second level. You have to at least ask higher level questions. When do we do assessment? Of course, at the beginning of a school year, semester, or learning unit. You give assessment, especially I always give unrecorded tests just to know what my students know about my subject. So you can give assessment at the beginning of the semester. Throughout the teaching learning process, while you're teaching, you can assess. And then at the end of the school year or semester or unit. When do we assess again? Anytime. So the answer is anytime. It could be at the beginning, it could be during, or it could be after teaching. All right, let's proceed to the modalities in assessing learning. How do we assess? It's either face-to-face, not the traditional method. You can do online assessment. There are tests, there are assessments, there are evaluation done online. I know you're familiar with this. Or you can do blended, face-to-face with online. So that's according to Balagtas et al. 2020. What do we assess? Knowledge, reasoning, skills, product, and disposition. So these are the targets, as I mentioned earlier, that in assessing, we should have targets. So you should know what skill to test. You should know what knowledge you're testing and the rest. How do we assess? There are guiding principles in assessing learning. So it's purpose-driven, valid, reliable, authentic, fair, or inclusive, practical, continuous, holistic, balanced, or ethical. Let's look at this one by one. Purpose-driven. Every classroom assessment must have a purpose so that we will know the attainment of learning outcomes, whether the learning outcomes are achieved or not. There should always be a purpose. So let's look at this. The target is knowledge. The learning outcome is spell word correctly and apply it in written communication. What's the tool or the technique for assessment? It could be a quiz or oral questioning or writing exercise. For reasoning, the learning outcome is prove the congruence of angles A and B for mathematics subject perhaps. What's the tool or the technique for assessment? You can give a quiz or an essay or an observation. If your target is the skill, the learning outcome is you perform, for example, a dance. It's an example. And then how do you assess that? What's your tool or your technique? You're going to use observation sheet or you're going to use rubric. For the product, if you target the product, the learning outcome would be, example is you construct a model of the atom, and then how do you assess that? You prepare a rubric so that you will have a feedback as to the performance, how that model was done, whether the model was good or will it pass your evaluation. That's purpose-driven, meaning to say we would like to know whether the learning outcomes were achieved. Second, in classroom assessment, make sure that your assessment is valid. You were able to measure what you intend to measure. It should be reliable. When you say reliable or reliability of your test, it refers to the consistency of the result or the performance. Because if your test is not reliable, the result would also be not reliable. So there are different ways of testing reliability of the test. You have the spit half, you have test retest, You give the test and then analyze, and then you have to analyze the answers. And then establish the reliability coefficient of your test. Authentic. Your test must be authentic. You have to use real-world application of the test, and then it should be fair. There should be no discrimination, there should be no bias, there should be no favoritism in your test. It should be fair, and then it should be inclusive. You should give equal opportunity for learning. Practical, the familiarity and ease of doing assessment, it should be practical. You don't give a test online if the students do not have computers, if they do not have access to the internet. That's according to Balagtas 2020. And then continuous. There should be constant evaluation and monitoring of learning progress. You do not end your assessment at the middle of the semester, at the middle of the year. Assessment must be continuous. There should be constant evaluation so that you will have feedback about the performance of your students. And it should be holistic, the comprehensiveness of learning. You have to evaluate, you have to measure the overall performance of your students. And then it should be balanced. There should be equal representation of learning. And then ethical must be in conformity to acceptable practice or standards. These are guiding principles of classroom assessment. What are the approaches in assessing learning? I have to reiterate this because I have already explained this earlier. It's either traditional or the use of portfolio, or you assess the performance. Now we call that performance-based. Let's look at the techniques in assessment. The techniques and tools in assessing learning. There are three, which we mentioned earlier: traditional, portfolio, and performance-based. For the traditional, we use tests, as what we have already mentioned earlier. For the test, it could be test or non-test. For the test, it's paper and pencil. For the non-test, we have checklists and scales. For the portfolio, if you have you can use documentary. All of their documents must be placed in one folder, and then there are multiple measures for the process and the product, and then you use rubrics for assessing portfolio. And then for the performance-based, through demonstrations and through creations. Let's look at the process in developing assessment tools. We start by designing assessment framework, and then we set targets. That's the second. So we design, and then we set targets, and then we develop and review specifications. How do we do this when we prepare a test? We sometimes do table of specifications because we would like to know if your target is on the 4 skills. So we have to do table of specification. How many items for listening, how many items for speaking, how many items for reading, and how many items for writing. So you have to develop and review the specifications of your test. And then you write the test. You give the task. And then validate it, whether your test measures what it intends to measure. And then you revise the test items, and then you pilot test it. If you're using a standard test, you don't have to pilot test. But if your test is a classroom, teacher prepared test, you have to pilot test it. And then you analyze the results. So we do not pilot test anymore inside the classroom. This is generally assessment. Generally, when you do assessment, you have to pilot test, but inside the classroom, we do not anymore do pilot test. We just give the test based on the lecture that we had with our students. And then you analyze the results, you revise if there's any to revise, and then you try it out. If okay, establish its validity and reliability. If not, try it out again. And then when the validity and the reliability are already established, if they're okay already, you prepare, and then you administer the test. So that's the end of the test. This process in developing assessment tools is by Balagtas et al. This is a general process as a general assessment concept. But inside the classroom, you may not do pilot tests. And the rest, yes, validity and reliability, perhaps you can forgo with that. Okay. How do we assess? Checklist. This is an example of a checklist. This is traditional non-test. It's very easy and it's very simple if we do paper and pencil test, right? Because we prepare the questions and then we let our students write the answer. But there is what we call traditional non-test, like checklist. This is called traditional non-test. This is a list of actions or descriptions that are checked off when particular behavior or outcome is observed. So according to Ragas 2007, look at this example. You only have the yes and no column and the not observed column. And then, for example, item number 1, uses enter key only at end of paragraphs. So this is a non-test, but you're using a checklist now, and then you're observing your student. Perhaps in this particular checklist, you're trying to assess the skill in the typing skill. Yes, how the student encodes in a computer keyboard. That's an example of a checklist. Consider as traditional non-test. Another is a scale. Look at this. This is a tool technique that records the frequency or degree to which a student exhibits a trait or an attribute. Example, the scale is 1 to 5. You have 5 is the highest, considered as exceptional, and then 1 is the lowest, considered as below class standards. So you have their overall rating. There are items, there are statements like establishes initial interest. What's your rating? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? That's a 5-point scale. If you have this is still a test, but this is considered as traditional non-test. And then we also use rubrics. A rubric is a scoring guide that contains a coherent set of criteria for students' work that includes descriptions of levels of performance quality on the criteria. So there are different types of rubrics. You have holistic rubric. This is a rubric that assesses a student work as a whole. And analytic rubric, a rubric that describes student work on each criterion separately. Let's look at the example of a holistic rubric. Example of a holistic rubric. Look at this. The scale is 1 to 3 only. 3 is the highest. 3 is considered as an excellent speaker. And then 1 is the lowest, considered as the poor speaker. At the middle is 2, which is considered as good speaker. Look at the rubric for scale 3. If you're an excellent speaker, you have there included 10 to 12 changes in hand gestures, no apparent inappropriate facial expressions, utilize proper voice inflection, and can create proper ambience for the poem. So what's the task here? The student is asked to read a poem. And then you're a poor speaker if you included 1 to 4 changes in hand gestures. And then so if you see this in your student, you give 1. Or lots of inappropriate facial expressions, used monotone voice, did not create proper ambience for the poem. See? So you are going to use rubric in the performance of the student. In this particular rubric, you're assessing how the student delivers a poem. And then sample of analytic rubric. What again is analytic rubric? A rubric that describes student work on each criterion separately. Okay, so let's look at the criteria. This is recitation. Number of appropriate hand gestures. So you have there a scale of 1, 2, and 3. 1 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 12. Okay, so look at the rubrics. Appropriate facial expression. If there are lots of inappropriate facial expression, you give 1. If only few, you give 2. If no apparent inappropriate facial expression, you give 3. Okay, so you have there a column you have ×1, ×2. Okay, this is the how frequent you observe. Voice inflection, monotone, can vary voice inflection. So that's an example of analytic rubric. Are you still with me? Okay, guidelines for administering a test. So now we already have prepared the test. We are now ready to administer the test. First, provide a quiet, comfortable setting. This is a given. That's why we always consider the venue of the test. It should be quiet. It should be not so cold and not so warm. They're comfortable. Try to anticipate and avoid questions during the test by using good directions. So when you administer a test, make sure that the directions are clear so that test takers would avoid asking questions. Provide a good psychological setting. Provide advance notice, review, and encouragement for pupils to do their best. This is prior to the actual taking of the test. Okay, so please do this in your classes. Do this to your students. And then discourage cheating through seating arrangements, circulating the room, and enforcement of rules and penalties. You should not distract them also. You just circulate in the room, but not to the point that you are distracting their focus on answering the test. And then help pupils keep track of time. Remind them when they start the test and then announce before ending the test. Minutes after ending the test, like 10 minutes more, but do not remind them many times while they're taking the test. Okay, so we're done with the guidelines for administering the tests. We now proceed to the guidelines for scoring the test. So we're done with the preparation of the test. We have already administered the test. We're now ready to score the test. Test scores should be based upon topics that were taught and items that are clearly written. So, caution, do not give a test in your classroom if you did not teach the topic. Okay, make sure the same rules are used to score all pupils. So you have to be fair. Whatever rules you use for one particular student or pupil, you have to apply this to all. All right, next, be alert for the following distractors that may affect the objectivity of essay scores, like writing style, grammar and spelling, neatness, scorer fatigue, prior performance, and carryover effects. These are distractors that may affect the objectivity of essay scores. When you score an essay test, you have to be very careful about all this. Define what constitutes a good answer before administering an essay question. So before you give the essay question, you have to guide also your students, your pupils, about how to answer the essay question. You do not dictate while they're already answering. Do it before administering the essay question. And then score all answers to the first essay question before moving on to score the succeeding question. When you rate the essay question, you always rate the first essay question before moving to the next. Read essay questions a second time after initial scoring. Okay, so it's very important that you read the question again before you answer. You give the final rating to the answers, and then carry out post-test review in order to locate faulty test items and when necessary to make scoring adjustments. So when you score a test, you conduct a post-test test review. After giving the test and then you have already given them the scores, you have to discuss to them their score, so they will know where they perform poorly, and they will be able to make adjustments, and they also learn from their mistakes. Okay, so for the grading and reporting systems, we have the standards base. We base this on the standard. I am not really sure what standard you are using in your respective schools, but we always have standards. Now, this is the use of criteria or content standards or performance standards, percentage weights, weighted scores, and transmuted grades. There is always a standard. Whatever is your standard, you either decide it or your school decides it. Example, components written work. You have 30%, 40%, 20% for other subject areas. For the performance, and 50% per language, and then 40% only for science, and then for MAPE, that's 60%. This is an example. No, the source is the depth order. Of course, I have to use Philippine standard. This is depth order number 8, series of 2015. And but the point here is that when you grade and report assessment, the performance of students, you should follow some standards. Another example is for the written work. These are just examples. No, for these examples are for senior high school. So the point is you may follow a standard if your school needs a standards-based assessment. And you have the weighted score there, the percentage score. This is what we're using in DepEd. Okay, I'm not very sure what's your standard. So let me just show you an example of the standard here. This example is on physical education. I'm not very sure if you're teaching PE, but the subject is PE or physical education. The components to be considered in assessment are major exam, quizzes, participation in sports. Percentage based on standard. This is either designed by the school or decided by the teacher. Major exam is 35%, quizzes 15%, participation in sports is 50%, with a total of 100%. So aside from the standards that we have that you could follow, we also have what we call competency-based. This is the use of minimum learning competencies, or MLC, or most essential learning competencies. This time, during the pandemic, we use the most essential learning competencies. So whatever is the standard, whatever is set by the Department of Education, if you would like to use the competency-based assessment, you can use that. So aside from the standards-based, you can also use competency-based. Another is outcomes-based. This is the use of learning outcomes at the course and program levels and graduate attributes at the college or institutional level. So we look at the outcomes. So when you look at the outcomes, you're using outcomes-based assessment. All right. So we now proceed to the scores and grades. Now the grading and reporting systems. Just allow me to present based on my exposure, but you may or may adopt this in your respective classrooms. But my point here is whatever is the standard that your institution requires you have to follow that. Now let's look at the score. The score is the quantity of achievement or learning a student has obtained in a test. The grade is the number, letter, or word that indicates overall achievement or learning in a given subject or course. What are the types of grade? Number grade. So number grade is either 98, flat 1, 1 to 5, and then percentage grade, 98%, 50%. Letter grade is A, B, or C. A minus, Silliman is using this. And then the descriptive or the nominal grade. Very good, excellent. These are the types of grade. They're all grades. That's according to Asaad and Hailaya in 2004. We should know how to transmute these grades, these scores, not the scores, into grades. Because when you give a test and then you rate the test, you are only giving the score. You should be able to transmute from the score into grades. You call that transmutation methods. The transmutation of the scores of your pupils to grades, you have two, either Criterion reference method. Criterion, this is measurement and evaluation of students' performance based on minimum standard set. That's the formula. Cutoff score is equal to the standard times maximum performance. Criterion means whatever is the standard of your school. For example, in the Philippines, if it's a language course, the standard is that 70% of all tests you pass. If you pass 70% of the test for a language test, that's the cutoff. For a science subject, it's 50%. So there's a criterion. So we call that Criterion reference method. So there's a standard. That's why we say, the standard of the school is high, or that school is substandard, because even if you cannot meet the cutoff score, you still pass. So that's Criterion reference. So let us concretize this. If the test is a 100 item test, 100 item test, if it's a Criterion reference, prior to giving the test, you already decided, because you have already designed your grading and reporting systems, that you follow the 50% passing. So for if the test is 100 items, 50 correct answers is the passing. So you have to get at least 50 above. So that's Criterion reference. Another method is the normative reference. This is measurement and evaluation of student performance based on the norm. So the highest and the lowest obtained performance is set. The cutoff is equivalent to the mean, or mean score, and then minus 0.5 standard deviation. That's according to Asaad and Hailaya. Simply put, normative reference method is that you do not follow the 50% standard. You don't follow a 70% standard in passing the test. You just get the highest score of the student's performance. So for example, the item is 100, you have a 100 item test, and then you will use normative reference. Whatever is the highest score, for example, the highest score is 75, that score would get the highest grade. Meaning to say, that's normative reference. You're not using Criterion reference. So, and then from there, from the cutoff score, you decide how you distribute the levels of grades in the school that you are in. So different schools have different grading system. So you have to adjust. You have to make the necessary adjustments in the transmutation of scores into grades. All right. So that's more or less all topics about wait, cut muna MJ. Isip ako. Okay. So That's Criterion reference and normative reference on transmuting the scores into grades. How do we assess our students in our setup this time? In the context of blended learning or flexible learning, you can use any of this assessment. It could be face-to-face, it could be online, or it could be blended. So it now depends on your situation. I will leave that to you as to what uh, what method or how will you do assessment in your classroom. So it now depends on your situation. All right. So more or less the topics are already discussed for this session on classroom assessment. In conclusion, assessing pupils' performance, whether traditional or non-traditional, provides evidence about the wide range of knowledge and skills that make up the teaching learning process. Teachers need to know which assessment method is best to measure particular learning objectives. Only then can teachers make conclusions about their pupils' achievement. So these are my references on classroom assessment. And thank you so much for listening. And Kat, these are my references for my session classroom assessment. And thank you so much for listening. If you have questions, you can email me at anwelms@msutawitawi.edu.ph. My number is +63 917 707 6218. Again, thank you so much. Bye. Cut na ha, Angel. Cut na, MJ. All right, thank you so much, Sir Nico. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for listening. This is Dr. Ann Welms from MSU. Bye. When you score, when you rate the essay question, you always rate the first essay question before moving to the next. Read the essay questions a second time after initial scoring. Okay, so it's very important that you read the question again before you answer. You give the final rating to the answers, and then carry out post-test review in order to locate faulty test items and when necessary to make scoring adjustments. So when you score a test, you conduct a post-test review after giving the test, and then you have already given them the scores. You have to discuss to them for their scores so they will know where they perform poorly, and they will be able to make adjustments, and they also learn from their mistakes. Okay, so for the grading and reporting systems, we have the standards based. We base this on the standard. I am not really sure what standard you are using in your respective schools, but we always have standards. Now, this is the use of criteria or content standards or performance standards, percentage weights, weighted scores, and transmuted grades. There is always a standard. Whatever is your standard, you either decide it or your school decides it. Example, components written work. You have 30%, 40%, 20% for other subject areas. For the performance, you have 50% per language, and then 40% only for science, and then for MAPE, that's 60%. This is an example. No, the source is the depth order. Of course, I have to use Philippine standard. This is depth order number 8, series of 2015. And but the point here is that when you grade and report assessment, the performance of students, you should follow some standards. Another example is for the written work. These are just examples. No, for these examples are for senior high school. So the point is you may follow a standard if your school needs a standards-based assessment. And you have the weighted score there, the percentage score. This is what we're using in DepEd. Okay, I'm not very sure what's your standard. So let me just show you an example of the standard here. This example is on physical education. I'm not very sure if you're teaching PE, but the subject is PE or physical education. The components to be considered in assessment are major exam, quizzes, participation in sports. Percentage based on standard, this is either designed by the school or decided by the teacher. Major exam is 35%, quizzes 15%, participation in sports is 50%, with a total of 100%. So aside from the standards that we have that you could follow, we also have what we call competency based. This is the use of minimum learning competencies, or MLC, or most essential learning competencies. This time, during the pandemic, we use the most essential learning competencies. So whatever is the standard, whatever is set by the Department of Education, if you would like to use the competency-based assessment, you can use that. So aside from the standards-based, you can also use competency-based. Another is outcomes-based. This is the use of learning outcomes at the course and program levels and graduate attributes at the college or institutional level. So when you look at the outcomes, you're using outcomes-based assessment. We will proceed to the scores and grades. Now the grading and reporting systems. Just allow me to present based on my exposure, but you may or may adopt this in your respective classrooms. But my point here is whatever is the standard that your institution requires you have to follow that. Now let's look at the score. The score is the quantity of achievement or learning a student has obtained in a test. The grade is the number, letter, or word that indicates overall achievement or learning in a given subject or course. What are the types of grade? Number grade. So number grade is either 98, flat 1, 1 to 5. Percentage grade, 98%, 50%. Letter grade is A, B, or C, A minus. Silliman is using this. And then the descriptive or the nominal grade. Very good, excellent. These are the types of grade. They're all grades. That's according to Asaad and Hailaya in 2004. We should know how to transmute these grades, these scores, not the scores, into grades. Because when you give a test and then you rate the test, you are only giving the score. You should be able to transmute from the score into grades. You call that transmutation methods. The transmutation of the scores of your pupils to grades, you have two, either Criterion reference method. Criterion, this is measurement and evaluation of students' performance based on minimum standard set. That's the formula. Cutoff score is equal to the standard times maximum performance. Criterion means whatever is the standard of your school. For example, in the Philippines, if it's a language course, the standard is that 70% of all tests you pass. If you pass 70% of the tests for a language test, that's the cutoff. For a science subject, it's 50%. So there's a criterion. So we call that Criterion reference method. So there's a standard. That's why we say, the standard of the school is high, or that school is substandard, because even if you cannot meet the cutoff score, you still pass. So that's criterion reference. Let us concretize this. If the test is 100, it's a criterion reference. Prior to giving the test, you already decided, because you have already designed your grading and reporting systems, that you follow the 50% passing. So for if the test is 100 items, 50 correct answers is the passing. So you have to get at least 50 above. So that's criterion reference. Another method is the normative reference. This is measurement and evaluation of student performance based on the norm. So the highest and the lowest obtained performance is set. The cutoff is equivalent to the mean, or mean score, and then minus 0.5 standard deviation. That's according to Asad and Hailaya. Simply put, normative reference method is that you do not follow the 50% standard. You don't follow a 70% standard in passing the test. You just get the highest score of the student's performance. So for example, the item is 100, you have a 100 item test, and then you will use normative reference. Whatever is the highest score, for example, the highest score is 75, that score would get the highest grade. Meaning to say, that's normative reference. You're not using criterion reference. So, and then from there, from the cutoff score, you decide how you distribute the levels of grades in the school that you are in. So different schools have different grading system. So you have to adjust. You have to make the necessary adjustments in the transmutation of scores into grades. So that's a criterion reference and normative reference on transmuting the scores into grades. How do we assess our students in our setup this time? In the context of blended learning or flexible learning, you can use any of this assessment. It could be face-to-face, it could be online, or it could be blended. So it now depends on your situation. I will leave that to you. What method or how will you do assessment in your classroom? So it now depends on your situation. All right. So more or less, the topics are already discussed for this session on classroom assessment. In conclusion, assessing pupils' performance, whether traditional or non-traditional, provides evidence about the wide range of knowledge and skills that make up the teaching learning process. Teachers need to know which assessment method is best to measure particular learning objectives. Only then can teachers make conclusions about their pupils' achievement. These are my references for my session classroom assessment, and thank you so much for listening. If you have questions, you can email me at anwelms@mshatawitawi.edu.ph. My number is +63 917 707 6218. Again, thank you so much. Bye.